Welcome to the Think Conversation series, which explores issues shaping South Africa. I'm Lucky Mathebula from the Think Foundation. We are conversing with and by South Africans who have influenced and continue to influence. They have ideas about how to improve our country through their leadership. This is more than a conversation. It is a thought-provoking dialogue for a nation ready for the next 30-year takeoff. Most significantly, we unearth voices the nation should also be hearing. We are exploring leadership axioms that make nations competitive. The first axiom is that prosperous nations, companies, and individuals share a common trait, which is they invest in human competence, leadership, and long-term thinking. Second axiom, the decisions nations make today define the nation they become tomorrow. The third axiom, what nations decide and fail to implement will haunt their future. With me is Mr. Sello Hatang, the former CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation and now the Executive Director of Hata Mmogo Foundation. And Tate Hatang, welcome.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Let me start by sharing with you and getting your view on this thing. We are in the 102nd year as a country of our imagination of human rights in South Africa. If you remember the 1923 Bill of Rights, which was developed by the ANC then, we're also in the 70th year of imagining our human freedom, the Freedom Charter in 1955. We're in the 30 years of our 1996 Constitution, which to me says we have brought all those things together and we now have a constitution to deal with. Are we doing well?
That's a very difficult question, because what makes it difficult is that we're trying to collapse things into one that actually we should be saying, let's break them down first. So please indulge me.
Yeah.
So for me, there's a convergence of things that should have come together when it comes to the Constitution. All these elements that you're talking about, we should not, in the process, not forget our woundedness. And that woundedness comes with the 1913 Land Act, for example, the separate development acts that came through. All that is part of our woundedness. And that woundedness comes with how we were reimagining ourselves. And that reimagination comes to 1996. Now, if you were to evaluate us objectively, we all have to agree, no, we're not doing well. You look at the economy, we're not doing well in terms of making sure that we empower black people. You look at how black people themselves treat and think of themselves, we're not doing well. We're still struggling with how the software, the hardware up there doesn't actually enable us to begin to rethink of or think of each other in a way that we wanted or dreamt of in 1996. So if you were to think of all those things we are not doing well, where are we doing well? Where we're doing well, I would say it's in instances where we followed through on things that our forebears put in place. We failed on the Truth Commission in most parts of the Truth Commission. Our education system continues to fail the black child in particular, but except the ones who can afford, like my children, to go to a private tuition and then also go into a private university if you can afford. Those kids are well off. That's where I'm saying we got something right in terms of creating an enabling environment for the black child to be able to access what you would consider to continue being a white education system.
Okay.
So we've created an enabling environment that's not necessarily very accepting of the black child. It still struggles with the black child, and the black child has to assimilate for them to become who is being imagined to be a progressive, civilized, a this and a that. And that's why so for me, Prof.
Maybe let me add a dimension to this question, which I think you'd also go on your thought, but I just want to add a little dimension to say you had been responsible for steering, as part of a very able collective, the curating of a larger-than-life individual, Nelson Mandela. We have seen how Madiba continues to live in the Nelson Mandela Foundation as an undisputed human rights icon and leadership, and you were part of that. But I just want to, as you are in that wavelength, have we curated the spirit of Madiba to sustain long-term imagination of human rights and associated freedoms? You know, there's a spirit in Mandela, which I want to know, have we curated it enough so that we can sustain this imagination of human rights and associated freedoms that go with that?
I would say we have been able to curate parts of that successfully. But when you speak of spirit, you and I have to agree that it's one of the most difficult things. We are very good at curating word, but curating spirit is a difficult thing because it's soul of a nation.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, South Africa has lost part of that soul.
Mm-hmm.
And the loss of that soul sees itself in how we continue to just view each other in a particular lens, from race, gender, how we continue to be discriminatory in our approach of what's different, how we still to date are quick to judge a fellow African, but wouldn't do the same with a Chinese person, wouldn't do the same with a Russian who is illegally in the country. The port of entry gives you some privileges. When you fly in, there's a particular privilege that comes with that as opposed to driving in. Don't know if you've you've seen how you drive to Botswana, you drive to Lesotho, you drive to Eswatini. There's a particular thing how the country shows you its true colors about whether it's receptive or not. So the spirit, for me, you capture it with the soul of the nation that's receptive to another, that it doesn't other the person further, it makes them feel part of the whole. And there we have therefore failed to ensure that we can sustain that which was started many years ago, not just by Nelson Mandela, but by Bontate Luthuli. Going back, Bontate John Dube, going back to Bogandi, going back. And if we are to go back that far in terms of the soul of a nation that knows we can reimagine the self without necessarily dimming the lights of another.
Okay.
Therefore, we have failed in that sense.
In that wavelength again, the idea of a national dialogue, some of us who know is that it was first muted by the foundations. I think you had what we call a National Foundations Dialogue Initiative as early as 2012 or 2013. What were the issues then when you were thinking about this, and how will this expanded national dialogue format and approach make a difference to the nation? Because it was tried later, but now we have an expanded and a format that is changing. How will this still be?
I think the main difference from what we had in mind, what we were imagining then, and what's being spoken about now, is that at the moment we're talking about a dialogue that would be all-inclusive, that would involve a domestic worker who needs to then also say, this is what the country I dream of. I don't think when we were talking about it then, we were thinking of it at that scale. Mm-hmm. But in terms of issues, they remain the same. And that tells you how the nation has not actually changed much in how it is dealing with the difficulties, the intractable problems of itself. And here I'm talking race, the economy, I'm talking media, from ownership to attitude to presentation. I'm talking big business. Those are the four that I'm particularly interested in. But of course, there's a myriad of issues that we could talk about. So back then, those four are still the same as when we were talking about it, when you and I were talking about it way back in 2012, 2013. And it pains me to have to admit that so many years later, these things are still proving intractable, that they are proving themselves to be so ingrained in our being as a nation that it's time that this dialogue, if it has to achieve one thing, is to enable us to be able to look at the mirror, face it honestly, and say we have failed our people, not today, but we're failing them in the future. So those who are still to be born will be born in a nation that's still struggling with its identity. Who am I as a South African? What matters for me? What kind of international outlook do I have? How do I look at Dr. Mathebula and say, this is a brother? How do I look at Palace and say, that's a sister? And not think what constitutes the differences between us. And for as long as we still thinking what Ntate Nyerere was talking about when he said, it starts with having to even forget and kill the tribe, that you begin to imagine a nation that's different.
Okay. We will be back with more on the same conversation.